For a long time, I thought I knew exactly what I wanted from climbing. I remember first hearing about Hubble, this route that when it was first climbed in 1990 by Ben Moon was considered the hardest in the world. I was stood at the Gap in South Wales with a friend. He mentioned it just in passing, but that planted a seed. I grew up in the West Midlands, and suddenly this idea formed in my head. If the hardest route in the world was in the Peak District, maybe one day I could climb it. As it turned out, that was the beginning of something much bigger. I'm Matt Wright, and this is episode 5 of A Climber's Mind. When I first started climbing, I had this underlying belief that I could do anything if I put my mind to it. I knew I started climbing relatively late. I was 16, and most of the climbers I looked up to had started climbing much younger. But that didn't really bother me. If anything, it just meant I had some catching up to do. And what made it feel more real was that it wasn't all happening somewhere far away. I remember hearing about Jim Pope climbing the hardest route in South Wales at the time. And even though I felt miles away from that level, it made it feel possible. The way I saw it was, if somebody of a similar age could climb such a hard route, then why couldn't I one day? Quite early on, climbing stopped being just something I did for fun. It became something I was doing with direction. I wanted to become the best climber I could be. And I accepted something very early on, that it wasn't always going to be enjoyable. Sometimes it was going to be hard, sometimes I was going to suffer, and sometimes I was going to have to force myself out of my comfort zone. And I was okay with that because I wasn't really chasing fun, I was chasing something deeper than that. I was chasing fulfilment. The feeling of becoming something, someone, and achieving something that maybe people didn't expect from me. And I know some people would say that's the wrong reason to do something, but I don't really see it like that. What actually qualifies something as the right reason? We're all different. We all have our own experiences, our own drivers, and our different reasons. And that's deeply personal. In my experience, very few people who become truly good at something are doing it for perfectly clean, ideal reasons. There's almost always something beneath it. And for me, part of that was proving something. Because I believed Hubble was possible, decision making became very simple. I didn't hesitate, I didn't overthink, I just moved towards improvement. I was constantly asking myself, what do I need to do to get closer to that level? And whatever the answer was, I was willing to do it. No ask was ever too much. Early on, I realised that technique and psychology were the foundations. I didn't see much value in structured physical training at that point. I saw climbing itself as the training. I became very observant very early on. I watched climbers like Adam Ondra break down what they were doing and try to apply that to my own climbing. And the way I saw it was simple. I was here and I needed to get there, and everything in between was just something to figure out. Hubble isn't just another route. It's known worldwide since it was once one of the hardest routes ever climbed, often described as the world's first 8C+ or 9A, depending on who you talk to. But for me, it wasn't really about the grade, it was about what it represented. Growing up, I often felt like I needed to prove myself. I remember telling my dad that I wanted to become a professional climber, and being told that wasn't realistic, that I should focus on something more stable. So I ended up going into engineering, which in hindsight was probably actually a really good decision. But that moment did stick with me, because climbing Hubble felt like a way to prove something, not just to other people, but mostly to myself. I didn't see it as a maybe, I saw it as something that was going to happen, and I built this idea around it. I'd think about how it would feel, the satisfaction, the fulfilment, the sense that I'd finally made it. I remember when I first passed my driving test, one of the first things I did was drive to the Peak District. And that evening, I stood underneath Hubble for the very first time. I just looked at it. I only climbed around 8A by that point, but I just sat there for a little while and thought, man, I'd love to climb this route one day. I'd watched all the videos, I knew all about it. I knew how hard it was, I knew who had done it, and I wanted to be part of that list. Even though I was nowhere near ready, I could see the gap of where I was and where I needed to be. And from that point on, it was just about closing that gap. Hubble wasn't just something I turned up and did. It took me over 30 sessions, spread over a few years, and for a long time, it felt miles away. I think it took me around 8 sessions just to stick the iconic crux move for the first time, the drop into the hidden undercut pocket. I got so desperate. I started changing the beater, and eventually I found this little knee scum that let me slow the move down just a little and make it marginally easier. But even then, it still took days of trying before I finally stuck it even once. And that route tested me physically in ways very few climbs ever have. The hard climbing's only about 7 moves long, but I spent weeks building bigger and bigger links, and the sessions weren't always that fun. A lot of the time, I was just failing on the same 2 moves over and over again. The undercut match that I was talking about earlier with the knee scum, and another move at the end of the 8B plus crux, slap with the right hand to a shallow dish. I doubted myself so many times. I often felt miles away, to be honest. But I also had moments where I felt unbelievably encouraged, especially when I finally stuck the crux move for the first time. That felt huge, and over time I became obsessed. I wanted it so badly. Every waking moment revolved around this route. For a solid month, I barely tried anything else. It felt like I was in this tunnel and everything narrowed down to just that one thing. And eventually, I did it. I climbed Hubble. But what I didn't expect was what happened after. I thought I'd feel fulfilled. I thought I'd feel complete, like everything I'd worked towards had finally landed. But the only thing I really remember feeling when I clipped the chains was relief. Just relief. Like all of that pressure I'd been carrying for years was finally gone. And I remember thinking, right, now I can just enjoy climbing. But that's not really what happened. People might look at an experience like that and think, how can achieving something so meaningful ever be a negative? And the truth is, it wasn't the achievement itself, it was the relationship I had with it. There's a difference between what you do and who you think you are. The problem starts when those two become the same thing. I attached my identity, my values, everything that made me me to the outcome. And underneath all that, there was this belief I'm not good enough unless I achieve something great. And when your identity becomes outcome driven, everything becomes personal. If the outcome doesn't match your expectation, it's not just disappointing, it feels like you aren't good enough. And that creates this vicious cycle. Nothing ever feels like enough. You're constantly chasing the next thing, trying to prove something, and the pressure just builds. Climbing stopped being something I enjoyed. It became about performance and validation, and this is the part I didn't expect. Climbing Hubble didn't free me, it trapped me. Before I did Hubble, I had nothing to lose. After I did it, I had something to protect. About 10 months after I climbed Hubble, I was at Anstey's Cove trying Ali Bombay, and I'd never really spoken about this before because at the time I felt pretty insecure about it. I was worried about what people might think. I thought maybe they'd think I didn't love climbing anymore. But that wasn't true. I've always known that climbing's a huge part of my life, and I love it. But I remember sitting there trying this incredible 8C, and I felt nothing. No excitement, no desire, just flat. And I remember walking away from sessions feeling like none of it really meant anything. And at the same time, I felt this huge amount of pressure. Because in my head, I was thinking, I've already climbed Hubble. I shouldn't be struggling like this. I felt like I should have done it already. I was impatient, and it was strange because there was no joy in it, and there was still this intense need to prove something. Looking back, I was completely burnt out. I'd probably needed to step back, but instead I just kept pushing because I still felt like I had something to prove, and if anything, I was even more hungry after Hubble. I just had to do it. And looking back, a lot of what was driving me wasn't just ambition, it was fear. Fear of missing out, fear of not being accepted, and underneath that, a deep need to prove something, to be recognised, to receive external validation. But there's another side to this as well. And I see this in a lot of climbers, fear of failure, and that can stop people before they even start. Because trying something at your limit means risking failure. It means potentially being exposed. It means feeling inadequate. And even though these two mindsets look different, they come from the same place. One pushes you too hard and the other holds you back, but both are rooted in attaching your worth to the outcome. Someone said something to me once, and that really stuck, that low mood can pull you back in the past, while anxiety pulls you into the future. I don't think that explains everything about mental health, but it helped me understand something about myself. I rarely get stuck in the past. My mind tends to race forward, into expectation, into pressure, into what might happen next. And I think that's a big part of performance anxiety for me. I stop thinking about present attempts and I start living ahead of myself. And neither of those things are healthy headspaces. They're both really toxic, but they're also very common, especially now with social media and status and with this idea that recognition equals fulfillment. I can tell you from my own experience that recognition does not equal fulfillment. And your experience might not look exactly like my experience, but I do see this in a lot of climbers. They avoid trying something because failing feels personal. They feel pressure after a breakthrough. They chase the next grade straight away. Or they lose motivation after achieving something they really wanted. I lost my direction. I lost my motivation. I was still climbing, but I didn't know why anymore. And I made the mistake I see so many people make. I thought the solution was to push harder. I didn't have a motivation problem. I had a relationship problem with what I was doing. And I think there's another important part of this as well. We often chase this idea of perfect motivation. I want to feel clear, switched on, certain. I want to wake up every day knowing exactly what I'm doing, feeling inspired and mentally in the right place. But the reality is, motivation fluctuates. Our state of mind is variable. Some days we feel driven and clear. Other days we feel doubtful, flat, distracted, or emotionally noisy. And that's normal. The problem is, when people expect themselves to feel perfectly motivated all the time, they start treating normal fluctuation as if something's wrong. But often, what actually helps isn't waiting for a perfect headspace. It's structure and routine. It's having a clear process and knowing what you're trying to do and how you want to approach it. Because structure reduces cognitive noise. You spend less time second guessing yourself, less time making emotional decisions, and less time getting pulled around by whatever mood you happen to be in that day. Structure and routine makes it so much easier to focus on climbing in its simplest form. The process, the movement, the session in front of you. Whereas when you have no structure, no routine, and no clear direction, things become very chaotic. There's too much noise, too many decisions, too much uncertainty, too much room for your state of mind to drift all over the place. And when that happens, your motivation can start to feel fragile because it's constantly being shaped by chaos rather than anchored by process. At some point I realised I could keep going like this, chasing more, proving more, or I could step back and actually understand what's going on. And honestly, one of the biggest changes I've made is learning to chase my own path and think less about external credit. That might sound obvious, but it's not that easy, especially when you're trying to build a career or feel accepted. Looking back, I can see I was actually quite sensitive and very insecure. And that led me down a path where I was constantly chasing something. But the real shift happened when I stopped chasing what looked impressive and started focusing on what actually matters to me. What I realised is that what I love about climbing is problem solving, new routing, and complex sequences, figuring things out, working through something over time. The process. Before that, I was chasing outcomes, grade, recognition, progression, and that led to some amazing achievements, things I'm really very proud of. But it also came with a deep sense of dissatisfaction. If your motivation is built on proving something, it will never be satisfied. Things really started to change when I got into trad climbing. Trad didn't just change what I climbed, it changed how I related to climbing. Because suddenly, grades weren't the main focus anymore. I wasn't chasing numbers, I was looking for lines. New bits of rock that looked interesting, complex, something that made me curious. I started climbing a wider variety of rock types and styles, different angles, different movement, different levels of commitment. And I realised I love things like soloing and bold trad. being fully responsible, fully present. But the most important difference was this: I wasn't doing it to prove something anymore. I was enjoying the whole process of finding a line, figuring it out, coming back to it, training for it, and piecing it together, and eventually sending it. But for the first time in a long time, it felt complete. The problem wasn't ambition for me. Ambition is powerful. It gives you direction, it gives you purpose. This isn't about lowering your ambition. It's about not letting your identity depend on it. Because when your identity is built on outcomes, you don't just risk failure, you risk losing yourself when you succeed. This is why understanding what actually drives you matters, because otherwise you may end up losing yourself through ambition. So if there's one thing I'd say, it's this: separate who you are from what you achieve. Because if you don't, you'll spend your whole time climbing, chasing something that can't actually give you what you're looking for. And sometimes the thing that allows you to move forward again is letting go of who you thought you had to be. Thanks for listening. If any of this resonates with you and you feel like your identity has become tangled up in your climbing, this is actually something I discuss with clients through my remote coaching. So if you're struggling with that and want help finding a clearer way forward, please feel free to reach out.